Hello ladies and gentlemen, I hope I'm going live about now. Definitely trying to shorten that period where I just look motionless into the camera as I tend to do, hoping that OBS will give me a sign or that the live stream on YouTube will actually start working somewhat at the same time when I actually click the go live button. But as always, hope dies last. I will try that in perpetuity and staying optimistic here. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mark Tech. This is somewhat dramatic. It's definitely not on the level of like my LTT videos, and it's not designed to do, by the way. I think there is a nice conversation to be had here, a nice nuanced conversation, even though I am known as a mostly pro Apple guy or pro iPhone guy. I apologize if my hand moves a lot in this video. That's because universal control doesn't seem to be working on my iPad since the latest beta, but that's, I guess, what you get for living the beta life. Not that kind of beta life. Oh my god, the internet always misconstrues everything. So but thankfully the channel is so small yet that like clip chipping is not something that I have to worry about. But those videos will of course stay up here in perpetuity as well. Now I did pre-announce this stream, so hopefully the people who actually want to watch this can catch me here. Of course, as always, this video will be available as a VOD. Thank you all for the feedback and basically also for the success of my last experiment by trying to do like a scripted opener that I can then like put into a self-contained video, not just like let it be a part of the live stream. It worked well for the Tesla video, though it killed the live stream completely. It basically gained some low-level success for itself, but then like the actual live stream became like, oh, the people who watched it live watched it, and then pretty much nobody else. Which is funny. It's fine. I know that Tesla is not even a subject that I cover on this channel, but obviously for videos like this that are designed to be like 2-hour analytical breakdowns of things such as the opinions of major YouTubers or dramatic situations, of course this video will not have like a scripted opener, so please watch this entire video if you actually want to get all my opinions, all my agreements and disagreements with MKBHD. I should preface this with saying that I am definitely somebody who appreciates MKBHD, but I'm not the biggest fan, probably just because I think I prefer like scripted reviews of Apple devices. I don't know why. I don't get me wrong, I love the quality that he puts into his videos, the attention to detail and stuff like that, but I just love stuff like extended battery life test, a ton of benchmarks, so it all sort of flows together, and it's just not the kind of thing that MKBHD does. Like he sometimes will post like 3 or 4 benchmark results, and sometimes he will just give just a vibes-based test on the battery results. It's much appreciated, and it's definitely something that the mainstream actually prefers, but I don't think that I should be explaining to anybody here that I'm not in the mainstream, that my technical knowledge about especially Apple technology is not in the mainstream. So MKBHD does fall a little bit short here, though I do believe he's the best YouTuber to watch as an introduction to TechTube. I don't think there's anybody better. I think in overall quality I actually preferred like the videos from somebody like Jonathan Morrison, but again, Jonathan does not do videos as often as I would like him to, while MKBHD definitely has a much more predictable schedule, but thankfully not as crazy as the one from LTT. But LTT's coverage of Apple is obviously a completely different beast here. So just checking if my stream is working. Yes, and we already have 4 people watching. Please, as always, let me know in the live chat what you think of my commentary or of MKBHD or of MKBHD's video. And always I'm just open for fun chats. jokes. It's our Silicon Magic, as you promised yesterday. You are now joining. Don't like him very much compared to others. Well, I think the appreciation for MKBHD drops parallel to the increase of your technological knowledge. I would say it's not because he himself isn't knowledgeable, it's because he definitely makes videos for the actual live stream. It's kind of like how your appreciation of XQC drops the higher your IQ is, right? I don't think anybody with an IQ above 25 can watch XQC unironically, and MKBHD does nice videos, but I think like the more appreciative one is of actual tech and deep breakdowns, the less his videos kind of matter. And at this point you can also ask, of course, does he deserve like this astronomic of a success in comparison to many other YouTubers? Obviously he is mega successful because he has been on YouTube from basically day one when he made like tech reviews what they are today, and I definitely would prefer more MKBHDs out there than LTTs, if that makes sense to you guys. So he's from New York, right? So I was bashing XQC, and in my other streams I was bashing like Linus. So if MKBHD had been Canadian, like we would be like really criticizing basically every Canadian left on Earth, which is such a shame because I love freaking Canada. But yeah, so that's kind of my overall opinion of MKBHD, and I kind of doubt that the opinion in my community will be very different, because from everything that I've seen, you guys are enthusiasts, some Apple enthusiasts, some Android enthusiasts, some PC enthusiasts, so I think there's definitely kind of not going to be a big divide between us, what we think of MKBHD in general. But then of course there's the question of what do we think about this particular video. So this video, just I'm getting a little bit of time up so that people can join beforehand. This video obviously is his iPhone versus Android video. Now I do know how the video ends, but I have not watched it in detail. I wanted to like be really responsive, and so that my reactions here are very believable, so they are actually 100% authentic here. Silicon, the title of his video was very vague, like the whole video, not iOS versus Android, but iPhone. Yeah, I think he put iPhone in the title primarily because people know what iPhone is, and I think iOS is not like as well known, and I would say I think MKBHD probably expected this video to perform better. I mean, it already has like 2 million views. I can only dream of stuff like that, but I think he expected like a little more spiciness from the community. But I would argue the iOS versus Android, the iPhone versus blah Android manufacturer debate has long been dead. It's been like confined to like some super hardcore like Twitter debates, but I think for the most part people are just comfortable using with what they like, and I don't think it's that important to them. And if anything, iOS kind of won because it has its like 15 to 20% market share that keeps growing. So it's showing that people who want to experience iPhone and can do so financially will do so eventually. Not everybody, of course, but iPhone and Android won in the sense that it does have, of course, the 80% or 75% market share that obviously iPhone cannot cover. A lot of it is like lower income stuff where Apple just doesn't even bother to present any alternative. But I would also argue that it also has to do with the versatility, with the fact that every manufacturer can use Android. So yeah, there definitely is like a vagueness to what MKBHD is trying here, and I think he was trying to go more dramatic than it actually panned out. he didn't really draw a line between hardware. Well, I would actually say that that's a good point, that MKBHD didn't draw a line between hardware and software, because iPhone and iOS are basically one thing. And for the most part, even if you get like an iPhone and it has like some deficiencies in terms of like feature sets that Android might already have, it's very likely that your iPhone will get so many software updates, and it will have so many like boosts from the ecosystem that it either will match that Android, or it will do something very like adjacent to what the Android device can do, but in a different way. And the same goes, I would say, for like iPad, which I think people like to compare sometimes to like Windows, sometimes to Mac OS. I think with Android, nobody really cares that much. People just buy cheap Androids, but then sometimes people will bring up stuff like DeX on the Samsung Tab tablets. I don't like the Tab name. But the point is, the iPad does have Stage Manager, and the iPad connects to a Mac in a completely seamless way. So for somebody like me, an Android tablet would have none of the productivity basically that I expect for my iPad, because my iPad works together flawlessly with my Mac. But obviously my Mac costs plus $3,000, so this is not, and my iPad costs $1,500. So I definitely don't expect people to build themselves the kind of ecosystem that I built for myself, because I have a big enthusiasm for it. So yeah, I mean, it's all opinions based, it's all vibes based, right? Silicon, I mean, Android runs also on tablets, of course. iPadOS is an offshoot of iOS, so does iOS. So iPadOS should have been included. Whether the video had no red line, I think the point was like smartphones in general, because if you were to bring up tablets, then you would have to also start up bringing like smartwatches, and like technically iOS runs on like devices like even like tvOS is technically like an offshoot of iOS. So I don't actually blame MKBHD for taking the route that he did. It's just Android is a word that people know. But again, we are going into it, and I will be providing obviously criticism when I think he is getting either something wrong or just his core approach is wrong. So let's get started.
Right,
as always, guys, please let me know if the audio balance is okay. For some reason this video like downloaded and it's like very like weirdly like imbalanced in terms of audio. It goes from like really loud music to like sometimes really quiet talking. I don't know if there was a problem with the original video. It's just the way it downloaded, and then it converted to like MP4. So please let me know if you can hear everything right, and if my own audio is like well balanced against the media source.
To the definitive iPhone versus Android video. It's the impossible debate, right? In a lot of ways, people just get so entrenched on one side that they never want to flip to the other side. To each their own. You hear that all the time.
I think I can already start here, which is I'm not entrenched. To anybody who watches my content, to anybody who follows me on Twitter, I actually have historically almost always, which I know can be an oxymoron depending on how exactly you use this, I have historically had Android devices as secondary phones. The last one was like the Galaxy S9 Plus, until like 2 years ago at this point. And then I ended up giving it away because somebody needed a phone, a friend of mine, and I didn't really need an extra phone anymore once I had the 13 Pro Max. But while I had my 10s Max for 3 years, I had an Android companion for it, basically. And I have always like tested out basically every like like relevant high-end Android device that comes out every year. This year has actually been a little bit of an exception in terms of the Galaxy S23 Ultra. However, I have recently gotten hands-on with the S23 Plus. Unfortunately, the S23 Plus is kind of a boring device. It did feel, though, very snappy in comparison to how Exynos devices feel in Europe usually, so the switch to Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 was definitely appreciated here. Silicon Magic, you just came over from Android, so now you are an iPhone user, so you're definitely not entrenched. And I think anybody who comes from Android, unless you're coming from like a dirt cheap device, which I never think is a fair comparison. It's kind of like with electric vehicles. I don't like it when people who have like a 20-year-old combustion engine vehicle that cost, when it was originally sold, like $20,000, right? So at this point, it's like worth what, $5 to $6 grand at best, and then those people get like a Tesla Model 3 or a Model Y for $50,000 or $60,000, and then they're like, "Oh my God, electric vehicles destroy the shit out of internal combustion engine vehicles." I mean, I genuinely think that electric vehicles are better, but you cannot compare like a brand new electric vehicle to a 20-year-old combustion engine vehicle. Drew from Talosive Tech and Talosive EV, he's like, "Oh, the Model 3 is like the best car that I've ever owned," and he owned like a 15-year-old like Hyundai or something. It's people have to know what they talk about, and I definitely appreciate people who really take a more nuanced view. Silicon always had the late Samsung S phone, so you definitely were not coming from a cheap device. I actually kind of have to say though, Samsung's devices can be kind of a really cheeky, good way to transition you to iPhone because of how much Samsung has changed over the years, right? Imagine when Samsung was like all in on like repairability with like easily to open back sides and like switchable batteries and all that crazy stuff, like the hand motion above the screen was recognized, so if your hands are dirty. And then of course you had 3.5 millimeter jacks, and Samsung were making fun of Apple. And then of course all the anti-notch rhetoric, but then they started even they had some phones that had like dual cutouts, but then they switched to like a single cutout because it was less comparable to a notch. And now I think they're kind of biting themselves for it, because if they had kept like the dual of camera cutout, they could have like gotten they could have like said, "Oh, we were first with like Dynamic Island or something," but now they cannot do that comparison, and they try to do those weird ads, and I think those ads have actually done more harm than good in the long term, because those ads are so easily disprovable. It's like there was like this video where one person was like going into the Apple store and was like asking, "Oh, which phone has like the fastest benchmarks," right? Like the Apple genius is like, "Oh, it's technically not our phone," right? But then like, especially in that era, the iPhone was so much faster and more reliable. Like it's ridiculous. People were like looking at this and thinking to themselves, "Yeah, this cannot be true," and it wasn't. Like just because it was winning in some benchmark, that wasn't actually true. That was the fastest phone. Nowadays, you can actually make the point that even with the iPhone winning in benchmarks, Android has been so well tuned over the years that it can keep up. But at that point, when those videos were coming out, that was definitely not the case. You're mentioning the Galaxy S4. Yeah, that was but the S4 was like ugly as sin. It's like, I remembered like that riffled back, right? That looks like a condom that is like done for her pleasure, right? So it has like a structure. I hated the design of the S4. I like the design of the S3, but that natural design, like that curvy design. But yeah, the screen on the S3, I hated how oversaturated it was. Like I had like people who got like the S3 and then later the S4, and we were like both like taking video outside it was a female friend, so she wanted some nice beauty pics, and we were taking like pics, and she was like, look how green the grass is, and I was looking through her phone like how the grass looked, and it looked like I was on ecstasy. It looked so freaking oversaturated, it was insane. But okay, that was a long diversion. I'm sorry, I'm getting back to the video. We're 20 minutes in and we're less than 20 seconds into the video.
But I have a solution. So here's how we're going to do this. So I'm going to break this down into 7 actually meaningful categories. So it's an
customization has improved on iPhone. I would still give it to Android. Features varies very strongly between like individual Android vendors, and I mean you can always bring up stuff like split screen multitasking, which I don't consider useful at all on a smartphone. So it's kind of difficult. Ease of use definitely goes to the iPhone. Updates and supports definitely goes to the iPhone. Apps, social media stuff especially, and games. I know that people would like bring up stuff like the ROG, like Asus gaming phones and stuff, but just look at Apple Arcade and I promise you are getting a better gaming experience than from anything that isn't like Genshin Impact or COD Mobile. Excitement, well, I get more excited for the iPhone, but with Android, you could probably say that, like, oh, they have, like, foldable tech and stuff like that. Again, I have not watched the video. I've watched, like, the beginning where he starts talking about customization and stuff, and then I saw the conclusion, so I got myself spoiled there. Ecosystem, to me, it's very easily iPhone, though I think if a big point for you in terms of ecosystem is the pricing, I would give that to Android overall, because you have like an easily available ecosystem. Like you can probably build yourself something like really great for $1,000, like in terms of like earbuds and a smartwatch and stuff like that, while here you are pretty much closer to $1,500 or $2,000, depending on if you actually want also like a somewhat high-end phone to go with it.
Number, so there has to be a winner, no tie. But since we're not psychos and we know that one winner doesn't automatically apply to every human on Earth, I'm actually going to give you a system, a rubric, to help figure out the real winner for yourself. You'll see what I mean. Let's get into it. So, all right, category number 1, customization. Basically, if you see this icon and you get excited, then you probably love customization too. So
no, that's like the utility button. What? No, huh? That's a weird thing. I mean, he probably means like the more settings you have, the more customization you have, but that's like not universally true. That was a little weird.
And messing around with the home screen and the lock screen and tweaking things and behaviors to make the device absolutely perfect for
okay,
you.
So he did mean settings.
It's a hobby all on its own. Now, at first, in 2023, it might actually seem like iOS 17 and Android 14 are pretty close, right? I mean, let's be real. iOS just added a bunch of really good features that are very
I would say customization on Android is like you get to customize it more. However, I would not say that it actually adds any meaningful functionality, the kind of customization that most people would do. Also, why is this a 13 Pro Max and not an iPhone 14 Pro? Where's the dynamic island? No static peninsula for us, guys.
very well done. The new lock screen update gives you the ability to change all these clock fonts and colors and put various super useful widgets on your lock screen, and then save a bunch of different lock screen setups for different situations and different focus modes. And then widgets were also added to the home screen less than 2 years ago as well, so that unlocked a ton of customization of home.
Yeah, but like iOS 14 has been like, oh, okay, so that is 2 years ago technically, but when you consider like the last version of iOS 14, I guess he means, like, we're closer to 3 years now since widgets have come out this way on iPhone. And I would actually say that stacked widgets were the biggest innovation to widgets probably ever. Like, I know on a big screen you can just have several widgets, But on a smartphone, like for example, there's like this Android widget where you have like the full calendar on your home screen. And my question is like, why? Why at that point just not click the freaking calendar app and get the actual full functionality of the app? Like, I know people just like to have glanceable stuff so you don't have to go into apps, but even to me, like, I know people would be like, oh, because Apple introduced widgets you suddenly like them. No, for one, I didn't use widgets until I fully understand like just how great stacked widgets are, and Samsung definitely understood that because Samsung very quickly copied that feature basically one-to-one in the way it's integrated. What I basically have is I have a calendar widget, a weather widget, and a stocks widget over each other, and a podcast widget. And then below that, I have the Siri app suggestion widget, which is actually not a widget at all. What it is, it's like it just integrates fully natively into the home screen, and it just shows you the apps, 2 rows of apps that Siri thinks is like relevant. I just remember that you guys cannot see my pointer, but I think you kind of understand, like where he has like those small widgets. Mine are twice the height, and it's like a stacked widget, but not auto suggested, it's manually tuned. And then below that, like in his last 2 rows on the home screen, for me those are Siri suggestions. And I would actually say I've used like Android devices with like similar suggestion systems. I know that Google Assistant and like other AI stuff is like more impressive than Siri. And I know that she will just now activate on my iPad, unfortunately. But in terms of like app suggestions, nothing comes close. And I've actually tried that on like restored devices. Maybe like I thought maybe she had like a bias, a positive bias for me, knowing my usage patterns. But I've actually tried that on completely new devices, and it was phenomenal right off the gate. I don't know if it has anything to do with that, with Siri like syncing data between devices, but it worked instantly when I was setting up like my 13 Pro Max, and it was definitely not the case with when I like restored my Galaxy S9 Plus. I actually, before giving it to the person away, I set it up for myself again and tried out all kinds of features. Tried out if like the battery was better now that there was like less bloat on it and stuff like that, if RAM management was better, and suggestions was one thing that I also tested.
Screen setups displaying glanceable information, but the more you look into it, the more you realize it's not actually that close. And a lot of this really just comes down to the fact that Apple, they do keep adding all these abilities, but you're always restricted to doing it the Apple way, the correct way. And so that's why a lot of iPhone setups still just kind of look the same. Like even if you just take stock Android 14 from the Google Pixel, which isn't even the most customizable version of Android, there's still way more that you can change. From the colors of the theme of the OS, matching the color of your wallpaper thanks to Material U, to icon packs, custom widget sizes. I mean, Android will just kind of let you do whatever you want. On the iPhone, you can't expand a widget to any size you want. You can't put an app just on the right side of your home screen for reachability. You literally can't even place an app wherever you want on the home screen. It must be the next up in the grid of Apple's choosing. You can't change the grid size. You can't change the icon sizes. I mean, it just takes a whole bunch of extra work.
Yeah, this is why I'm perfectly comfortable in giving that phone at that point to Android. It's just, to me, I don't think that point to me personally matters almost whatsoever. I think if we were still like in the pre-iOS 14 era and Apple didn't suddenly like design some of the best looking, most fluid widgets ever, then maybe we could have a conversation where Android's customization is not just aesthetically pleasing but also functionally way superior. But yeah, also like shortcuts like I know of course Android has shortcuts, but the way like it's supported by like enthusiasts and like third-party apps, I would say that also adds like to customization on iPhone that is far easier to access for far more people than many customization features on Android, which also come like, by the way, with a lot of other downsides. Like, yes, it's one thing when you have like icon packs, but when you have like those full-on launcher things, like that can impact performance, battery life. It can screw up some app functionality. Again, like I understand there are some very well tested launchers, but it's not like a universal truth. While with iPhone, the universal truth is you know what you get and it will probably work. So that's about it.
Cuts hack just to use a custom icon, just basic stuff. Now I think the other side of that coin is you can make a truly ugly, horrible Android setup where you can't really mess up an iPhone home screen that much. So while you can definitely argue that iOS does it prettier, the winner for most customization, that would be Android. So
it's
then
absolutely fair.
Features. All right, just straight up, which one can do more stuff? This has been one of the hottest debates at the forefront of iOS versus Android conversations you always hear, mostly because both platforms at some level launched missing features, but especially the iPhone. Like you'd always hear, wow, can you believe the iPhone can't even set wallpapers? And then it was, can you believe the iPhone is just now getting copy and paste? Seriously? And
I mean, copy and paste came like with iPhone OS 3. Right? It didn't came with iPhone OS 4. Yeah, I back in that day, like you have to understand that those phones were also like not competing with other smartphones. They were competing with feature phones. Like, and Android had like launched, but it was so slow, so buggy in several aspects that like the fact that iPhone was like missing like customizable wallpapers for a year or two didn't matter the shit to anybody. I would say the iPhone 4 and then the corresponding like Galaxy S1 launch were truly when we started getting like interesting smartphones with a lot of the functionality that you could expect it to have, right? I think the iPhone 1, 3G, 3GS, those were so new and any kind of competition to it was so irrelevant. I don't think that it makes sense to bring up those shortcomings. Himansu Magar, I don't actually think I've ever seen your name. This video is bad because iOS won. No. Who said the video is bad? I think this video is actually not as spicy as it could be. That's probably why it's bad for how many people are now watching the stream. No, but I think the video is actually, like, for what I have seen of it, which is little, admittedly, I like it. I think it's fair, and I myself have pointed out where I think Android wins and where iOS wins. Also, by the way, my channel is an Apple-focused channel. Do you really think I dislike that his conclusion is that iPhone won? Like, please look up my library of live streams. You will find me talking about the iPhone 15 Ultra, the iPad Pro 2024, M3 MacBooks. Like, yeah, I am an Apple sheep through and through, but I'm just nuanced. I'm an Apple sheep in the sense that I like Apple devices and I buy whenever I think Apple has a good device. Whenever Apple does something wrong, I'm very happy to call them out. Also, historically, I've mentioned that in the beginning of the chat, but to anybody who is new, I was a dual wielder. I used to have Android and iOS usually combined. It's just that like once you get a battery as great as on the 13 Pro Max, you kind of start arguing with yourself if you actually need a second smartphone at all.
Wow, it's crazy that iOS is just getting widgets now, a decade later. But hey, now it's 2023, and they're both very complete.
By the way, that's not 100% true. I know it's a very, like, it's kind of a technicality, but iOS had, like, widgets before. When you remember, like, the notification center in, like a decade ago, and they had, like, stocks and weather widgets, right, like, flowing on top. Again, it's definitely not a full-featured widget system, but technically it did have 2 widgets. Also, Apple, by the way, historically has like referred to the weather app and to the stocks app before their like big redesigns in like iOS 7 and stuff. They've like referred to them as like widgets. This is why they weren't even like covering the full screen originally when they launched. The idea was like, oh, they are supposed to feel different than a full-on all-screen app. I think that was always a little weird. They were always apps. They were never glanceable by default, unless you consider that like the front weather icon shows like the actual like temperature. But yeah, so technically iOS had widgets as well, but definitely not a full-featured widget system like what was introduced in iOS 14. Also, by the way, big shout out to, if you look in the background, MKBHD has like a 2013 Mac Pro trash can. It's like a vase with like some greens coming out of it. That's pretty dope.
Ways that they're copying each other all the time. You always see a new keynote with new stuff on Android, and you're like, that came from...
Yeah, and by the way, everything came from jailbreak tweaks anyway. Like, half of modern Android features are stolen from jailbreak tweaks. And so this idea that, like, anybody is stealing from anybody, look, I'm happy to call out when Google does, like, their Google I.O. and Android shows, like, privacy features that were in iOS 4 years ago. Yeah, I will briefly call them out on that in a very like ironic way, but ultimately I don't care. For one, I don't believe in like intellectual property as hardcore as some people do. I think a lot of it is like still from such common ideas. I never supported, for example, like Apple's quest to like squash like the competition based on like, oh, we patented the likeness of iOS. I think there were some egregious examples that deserved like lawsuits, but with Samsung I was always like, I'm a little torn. I think there were some things that I really didn't like what Samsung like stole deliberately, but for the most part I accepted that they had created their own identity. I think Apple's like problem with Android was more philosophical, with like the thing that they have worked actually with Google on several services that went into iOS, like Google Maps and YouTube and stuff like that. The problem here being only that obviously Google used that internal knowledge of what Apple was working on to create Android. There's no ifs or buts about it. So I think Apple's lawsuits were less about like, oh, you just took the icon size or something, and it was way more to do like, oh, if this was actually like fair competition, you would have launched a product like a year and a half or 2 years later, because you would have needed longer development time. So Apple was like trying to hold back Android companies, because obviously they did a massive step forward based on theft. I don't think there's another way to say that, from Google. Not even Samsung or something. Like, they were inspired by a lot of stuff from iOS, but I don't think that matters as much. Well, while we're on the topic of theft, like the likes of Huawei and some things in like Xiaomi UI and stuff like that, that is egregious. And I think if Apple wasn't like a little scared of China currently to really anger them, because they are already like really skeptical of having giving Apple as many freedoms in China as they do, I think Apple would really sue them. If they were Western companies, Apple would never allow the kind of like blatant UI copying that is happening on many of those phones. And that is actually something that I would support in a giant lawsuit that destroys those companies.
iOS, I think you'll see stuff from the iPhone keynote and be like, that came from Android. But there's even some new stuff now that the iPhone has that Android doesn't. A pretty good one recently is focus modes, which gives you super high control over notifications in various different situations with your apps and your contacts. There are also a lot of privacy features, things like hide my email with iCloud Plus and iCloud Private Relay. You could even argue that Dynamic Island on the Pro iPhone is a feature if you want to. But I mean, I couldn't because only a small handful of apps support it. But it's something pretty cool.
Really? I actually think that, like, because it has, like, support with, like, I always forget what the system is called. It's like when you call an Uber and you see that, like, oh, it takes, like, the driver so and so long, and you see that, like, on the bottom of your smartphone or tablet or the Apple device, right? It's basically like an extension of their widget functionality, and it works also in the Dynamic Island. So I think that actually more and more apps are supporting it. I think people have, like, a weird understanding of how much Dynamic Island should be doing. My point with that is, I think that would almost be bad if every app, like, tried to do something unique with Dynamic Island. I think it would kind of override, like, what your previous app did all the time. So I'm actually, like, of course I don't have a Dynamic Island phone, so that will be for me to judge once I have my iPhone 15 Ultra. But overall, I'm very happy with the state of what I've seen from the Dynamic Island.
More and more rare than ever in the smartphone world. At this point, though, neither OS is really missing any gigantic features anymore. They both matured up to this level.
Again, as I've said, unless you count like split screen stuff and side loading, though side loading by itself is not a feature, it's a permission structure inside the operating system, and that seems to be getting rectified in Europe starting next spring.
They both do a lot of stuff. But I still am going to have to give the edge
to Android
of course, in this one. Just because there are so many little, like, tweaky, like...
Yeah, and I mean, there's, like, DeX, I guess, and you can also, like, argue that Apple could never match all the functionality that every individual Android vendor would, like, try to get into the phone, and with that also, like, features could vary based also on hardware, which Android has much more varying hardware. You get, like, the stylus support, you get, like, the foldable devices. I think a lot of that will probably, like, go into the excitement factor, but yeah, I would also give that point overall to Android, though again, similar with customization, I don't think iOS is missing anything that would matter to me. Again, if we were prior to, like, probably, like, iOS 12, right, I would say that, yeah, definitely I would prefer, like, Android 14 over, like, if iOS had, like, stagnated at, like, iOS 11. But I am so happy with, like, the basic, like, multitasking experience, switching between apps, everything being fluid, and then, like, a ton of app support just in general, which is how I kind of use my phone. Steve Jobs knew that, by the way. Steve Jobs, by the way, was originally wrong. He wanted people to get, like, Silicon Magic emulators are on iOS. They're just, like, not, for one, I think MKBHD means native functionality, not stuff you necessarily download. Of course, you know me, I have argued that I will take site loading as a government mandate just simply to get emulators, but there is stuff such as the alt store, so there are workarounds, so it's technically not fully missing from iOS, but your point is of course taken.
Little OS level features, just little things that you can tweak and change.
Yeah, so he is referring mostly, you see, to, like, OS level stuff.
Battery management features to customize charging speeds or set manual charge limits to preserve battery life. There's also an
illusion, by the way, and nothing knows how to charge your battery better than the actual battery. So, like, I think, like, I would like if iOS allowed me to, like, set a maximum of 80%. Right, the way it's currently doing it is it charges it to 80%, then keeps it at 80%, and then charges it fully by the time you, like, are supposed to keep it up. So the point about this is that it stays less in the 90 plus territory. But to me, given that I probably would not run out of battery life on the average day, I would like to set it to 80%. However, customization where you could, like, set it to 50 or 60%, that to me is just weird. Why are you like depending on like the cost of the charge for how much you charge your phone? Like at that point, nah. I think this is over customization. It's kind of how some electric vehicles, like, well, there it actually does depend on the cost of the charge, right? But some will let you like not charge below 50%, and that to me still makes sense because the manufacturer does not only have to consider stuff like. Of course, you as an end user should be able to decide to a degree, but if you would charge your EV less than 50%, then we are talking about like, well, will the manufacturer now have to worry about you reaching your phone, right? Would you be potentially able to like maybe sue them if like that 50% was like something that wasn't explained or was like accidentally set up? What happens on a winter day where your like mileage goes down by half? So again, I think there's sometimes over featureization, if that's a word, that I don't think actually plays into a better user experience. Though of course, Silicon, as you've said before, emulators are awesome, and I just played like an hour of Pokemon Omega Ruby on my Mac at 200% speed at like 1440p resolution, and it was glorious. So I'm very happy to have emulators on an open platform like macOS.
Actual file management system, so you can drag and drop things on.
Yeah, don't give a fuck about file management systems on phones. Just do not. I know some people will like, oh, why does the iPad not have a file management system? And I kind of can understand it a little bit more there, but I do like the consistency between iPhone and iPad. With Mac, yeah, I do obviously know how to use like a proper like desktop file structure, but it's honestly not my preferred way. I do like it when it's more managed through like a UI, right? Like if you have like subfolders in an app, and obviously with like the sharing button that works as like a sandbox expansion, basically, you can send stuff to basically any other app realistically. And of course there's also like copy and paste, there's also like drag and drop inside the iPhone UI. It's not just on the iPad, by the way. You can like press on something on the iPhone, go into multitasking, open the new app, and drop it. It works. I use Pixelmator mostly on my iPad, but sometimes on my iPhone. It works fantastic. So, yeah, definitely some stuff can be overthought. Yeah, the Files app totally sucks on iOS and iPadOS. Well, that's your opinion, man. I think the Files app is very much different from a traditional folder structure. Like, it's not designed to give you like deep insight into the operating system or something, or to let you edit like DLL files or anything. iOS and iPadOS were designed to be run by the apps that you are running. I know it's like a philosophical thing, but it's designed to be like that the app that you open is like managing the stuff that you need to have, right? That includes like the files that you import there, the sharing that you do from the app. It will all have like its own individual tweaks based on the specific app functionality. So that's also just better than doing it like system-wide. So that's kind of my point. I just don't need it in general that much. Like for example, what kind of improvement would you want though, right? Like I barely use it as is, not because it's limited, but because I don't need it with the way that iOS and iPadOS is set up. I think the point of the Files app primarily to me is that it's not designed to be as integral to your use case it's like Finder is on macOS, or it's like the Explorer thing is like on Windows, because apps are self-managing. That's my point here. If Apple ever tries to give you like a complete redesign of how the actual operating system works, and a deeper insight into system files actually matters, then I think Apple would like give you the Finder instead of the Files app. But there's a reason why they call it the Files app. It's not a Finder replacement. Like even the names, right? They are actually very telling, right? The Finder app is designed to give you insight and the ability to find stuff wherever it is on your Mac, right? Which of course Files can do to a degree, but it's not the same thing. But because macOS is like structured in like easily to view folders, that's how you look for stuff. iOS will give you like spotlight search, and the only thing that I would criticize with iOS is that like the way that some apps integrate with spotlight search is like not mandatory enough. So I would really like for spotlight search to pretty much access any kind of app, any kind of file. But with files, it's primarily done to like, oh, you like download stuff. Now it's in your Files app because it's a file you downloaded. You're not finding it, you're not looking for it, you know where it is. Or you're like transferring something from a thumb drive. Well, it is temporarily in your Files app, but then you're very likely to put it into the app that you actually want to use. Silicon, like putting files into a subfolder of an app. Yes, okay, this is actually the point that I think it's highly depending on the app. This is why I'm saying that Apple hopes that this work is like done by the actual app UI. Like if you want like a subfolder inside like a word processing app, that should be managed by the word processing app, right? It's not a limitation in like what Apple can develop. It's a limitation based on how Apple perceives file usage on iOS and iPadOS. Again, I can see a better point for giving you a Finder-like app on iPadOS, but on a phone, I think it could lead to so much complication that most people would not feel comfortable with. If like any app ever then forced you to go into like Finder and stuff, I think that would really break the experience that people are used to. This is my historical argument against site loading, which is if site loading ever becomes ubiquitous enough so that people are forced to site load instead of the much easier and much used to experience of downloading from the App Store, that is when we are getting a downside. Site loading by itself is a net positive, but for the overall ecosystem, sure, Apple gets like money from App Store sales. I don't deny that. I know that this is a big part of their motivation, but don't forget that Apple was like locking down the iPhone before the App Store was a thing, and before the App Store even became profitable. The system was locked down, and Steve Jobs had like talks about like why the system is locked down in a time when the App Store was not as relevant as it is now. So there are philosophical things in iOS and iPadOS that some people just like to ignore because Windows and Android do it differently and they have the majority market share. Well, guess what? There is a reason why Apple can carve out its niche for itself. There is a unique appeal, and sometimes you get to that appeal by limiting some stuff and polishing some other stuff. Origin Unknown, I hope I'm not too late. Well, you are not in the beginning of the video, but we are only 1/3 through it, and Android has won the customization battle, and Android is currently winning. I mean, he declared it the winner already. But it's winning like the features battle, and I am trying to kind of like provide nuance on why to me those extra features in Android do not matter as much. Silicon Magic, well, Android hides site loading in the menus, doesn't it? People who need it could activate it when they need. I don't think that's universally true. I think it depends on like the skin that you have. I also think that if you just download something, you can click on it and then you are basically taken into like the menu to allow it. It's not like you would have to first find the menu and then go back to the file. So it's, of course, it's more difficult on Android to sideload than on Windows. That's true, but it's by no means locked down. The only reason why sideloading has not become a big thing on Android for like a lot of apps is because sideloading is not a thing on iOS. And people very much copy behavior that they know from iOS over to Android. Like iOS is kind of like the Hollywood of smartphones, right? Like Android might have more functionality, might have more variety, more diversity, but people will still copy what's happening over in Hollywood because it seems a little cooler. Yeah, Apple definitely will handle sideloading with like a locked down thing. My argument with sideloading is just that if like super popular apps started to go outside of the App Store, sometimes involuntarily, like in the case of Fortnite, sometimes maybe voluntarily, like I assume like third-party App Store would probably never be part of the App Store, and some maybe like governments will mandate it. If those apps are popular enough, they could start to switch in like the community mindset, and the more people are then convinced to go outside the apps. Let's say Steam comes like to iOS, and with Steam also just a generally higher perception of downloading stuff just from Safari and installing it. And I think that could then lead to problems with people treating iOS more like Windows, more even like macOS. And as Apple has said themselves, macOS is less secure than iOS and iPadOS. And by all accounts, this is pretty much empirically true. And they don't want to impact iOS security. So, but that was a long diversion. Origin, you definitely did not miss too much, but now we are continuing.
To your phone into certain folders if you want to. There's gaming-specific features like game modes, the ability to...
Game mode will probably come into iOS now that it's on macOS. Also, game mode by itself is usually... it's like a side thing of like an open operating system. If you actually have a closed operating system where one app, if it's like your full screen experience, it will just take the resources that it needs. While on Android, where you could have like really, really egregious background tasks eating up your RAM and some system level just performance, that is why you need game mode. It's kind of why game mode came to macOS. It's because so that an app can basically overwrite just how egregious some background tasks still are.
Dial up and down your screen's refresh rate whenever you want to. Independent volume controls for phone calls and ringtones and alarms. Also, reverse wireless charging comes up a lot for charging wireless...
Silicon Magic, and we all know how horribly insecure Macs are. Well, Macs are definitely pretty secure, but don't forget, there's a big part to why Macs are secure. It's because they are less popular. Like, it's not a joke. By any kind of metric, Windows is just so monumentally larger in its install base that it just attracts way more actual malware. The reason, for example, why Apple Silicon Macs launched and they had like significantly less malware was because malware was like super incompatible even with like Rosetta in the translation layer. But once they actually became popular, we started getting native Apple Silicon designed for malware. So yeah, and iOS has a infinitely larger install base than Macs. So there will be a bigger security impact for a large amount of people. Well, yes, Unix is definitely better than... I always forget whatever shit Windows is like built on, but Unix is no guarantee for security. Like, Unix is bad. It's better. It is actually like way better also like for system resource management, especially the way Apple has like obviously improved on it over the decades, but Unix is no guarantee for security. No operating system is.
Earbuds without breaking out a separate cable. Really, it comes down to the benefit of Android is having so much feature choice. That's kind of the point.
Yes.
And this also bleeds into hardware too. So even if the feature you want is a huge camera with no notch, then you have to get an Android phone, right? So if the feature is super fast charging, or a 10x camera, or USB Type-C, as of right now, it's got to be an Android phone. So even though they both offer all of the basic features and they appear to...
Exactly. This is why I've said I am comfortable giving those two phone points for now, customization and features to Android, because of the versatility of Android. I think Silicon Magic, I'm kind of getting the point that you made in the beginning, where you said he does not do a very good job in differentiating between hardware and software. It is a very mainstream approach, though I do think that enthusiasts will dislike this approach. I kind of get what you meant here. He is conflating a lot of software and hardware based things, and I don't always think that's fair, right? Even it's oh, you want a giant camera, right? For example, the Xiaomi's have a full 1-inch sensor, but a 1-inch sensor by itself is a tech spec. It's not a feature, right? It will take some great photos sometimes, but sometimes it will greatly lose to the much smaller sensor in the Galaxy S23 Ultra, in the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I guarantee you it will lose hands down to the iPhone 15 Ultra, and that will have a much smaller sensor. No notch. Well, you do have no notch now but maybe you don't want any kind of camera cutout. And then you have under display cameras on the Galaxy Fold, but that's a very, very different topic. So it's not you want fast charging, sure, but also a lot of people that get fast charging really jerk off to I get 120 watts, and the actual 120 watts that you get for 5 seconds. For the rest, it's sure, it's still way faster than the iPhone, probably more than twice as fast. The iPhone is currently 27 watts. If your Android can charge at 60 watts, it's definitely going to charge faster. But how much that actually impacts your actual user experience, how much faster it actually charges relevant not in percentage but in comparison to the actual hours of battery life gained, that also then becomes a different thing. Tech specs are not as easy as one point that you read. It's how all those points work together. It's kind of how 6 gigabytes of RAM on an iPhone can sometimes destroy it will destroy 8 gigabytes on Android hands down, but it will even keep up with 12 gigs. And especially if you have some kind of battery management stuff going on in Android, then you will likely lose with 12 gigs of RAM versus 6 gigs of RAM on iPhone. So again, it's all a give and take. Origin, if you want to play games like crazy, you buy an Android phones with a fan. No, you don't. You get a $50 fan that you get onto the back of your iPhone. That's what you do. I know the iPhone has less cooling than some high-end Android devices, but the iPhone game collection, especially thanks to Apple Arcade, is so much better, and the optimization level. A lot of people will sometimes do benchmarks with games, and they will mention, for example, that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 will often deliver now better gaming style performance than the iPhone 14 Pro Max. That is true in some cases, but when you actually look at some of the detailed breakdowns, you will sometimes find the iPhone has a more stable frame rate actually, or unless we get to overheating. This is why I'm saying with the fan on the back. But the other point is that iPhone will usually run at a high resolution while still trying to get to high frame rates. Something about just how the cache works, just it feels, even with like much less RAM, just iOS just does really well with like slightly higher like dynamic resolutions. So Genshin Impact, for example, has like historically been like somewhat difficult to compare to, because also like the settings are not fully one-to-one between iOS and Android. So no, Origin, I will actually fully disagree here. I think that with some help for the cooling, iPhone is far better, and also no phone lasts long enough while you do like Fortnite or COD Mobile, so you would probably just get an external battery pack anyway. And right now you can get a MagSafe battery pack for $50 with a fan in it. It's like Air Mag or something the company is called. So again, I don't use it because I don't actually game that much on my phone. I game on my iPad or my Mac or my PlayStation. But no, I actually disagree with this notion that like iPhone has been like beaten by Androids in terms of gaming.
Copy each other all the time on little added stuff. The winner here again is definitely Android. Now number 3 is ease of use. Now, ease of use is very valuable to a lot of people, like a lot of people. And the thing about ease of use is it often basically has an inverse relationship with customization and a ton of features, because there's this delicate balancing act you have to do of having flexibility, giving flexibility to the user, but not overwhelming them with a ton of buttons and settings. And this is really where the iPhone excels and has excelled for years, as a high priority for sure, even in the most fundamental ways. The home screen on the iPhone has had up to 4 icons in the dock on every iPhone since the beginning. And the phone icon has always been green and always been on the left every single time for 17 years. The iPhone's camera app, we've all seen that stay fundamentally the same with the viewfinder and the sliding modes. It's been like that for years, and that kind of...
Yeah, since like iOS 7. I think, and it's still, even if you go back to like older operating systems, it would still look familiar.
Tucks away a lot of the settings into a separate settings app, and it can feel like it's missing features, but honestly, it's still the easiest and most straightforward for most people to use. It's like they hate changing things for no good reason. The calculator has basically been unchanged for years. Now, there's also downsides to that, like Siri has basically been ignored since it was introduced, but still, like Apple moves the call end button by like 200 pixels to the middle of the screen and people freak out about it. Sometimes it feels like Android versions will just move stuff around just kind of to try it and for the sake of changing things, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. They'll move it back, and that's interesting and exciting sometimes, but that does hurt just user continuity and ease of use. Maybe not for you watching this.
I don't actually, like, I apologize for being silent. I know I'm not known for that. We like listened for like almost a minute with me being silent. But yeah, it's true. I don't think that his core approach is like... I think he's like almost stating it as like a negative that becomes a positive with like iOS not changing stuff. I think a lot of the ease of use does not just come from the comfort of like knowing what it is, but I think a lot of like the UI is much better self-explaining. There's also like stuff like just in general, when you get like a new iOS version, you get like all those splash screens about like what's new in the OS, and you have like the tips app with some small guides that will guide you through it. Apple has like a custom like an Apple support YouTube channel where there are a lot of features that are broken down and explained there in a very, very easy way. Apple just launched a huge website redesign to anybody who has not seen it yet, where you get to like a breakdown of all the apps that they make, and it's like beautifully explained. It's like so visually stimulating and nice, and it all flows together. And like the hierarchy of even like when something is translucent because you like have like the keyboard above it, you know what happens when you like click away a UI element because you basically got a glimpse of what was underneath. right? All that stuff takes a lot of like almost psychological insight, and I'm pretty sure Apple employs some psychologists when it comes to analyzing just how pleasing some new features are. But yeah, like I would never say that iOS biggest strength in terms of ease of use is the fact that it doesn't change. There's a lot coming together here.
But just think for the average person, like for your 5 closest friends, think about how they use their phone. Yeah. Then throw on top of that, there's basically never any bloatware loaded onto the iPhone, ever. And then customer service is basically always better for an iPhone. Because
yeah. Like I have not once had a bad experience with Apple customer support. Granted, I didn't have to rely on it that often, but whether it's a third-party store, when I had like my iPhone 3GS had to be fixed, when my iMac had some issues, it wasn't actually any kind of hardware problem. In the end, even like recently, like my iPad Pro had like an issue where it wouldn't start up, and those guys knew every button combination, stuff like that, which I wasn't that used to anymore, because like I was just so comfortable with like the gesture stuff. I kind of was like comfortable with like the reset gestures from like the iPhone XS era, but didn't read up on how they were like evolved over time. So they instantly fixed it. Granted, it was like 5 seconds of work, but because I'm an Apple user, I got there, they fixed it on a complete, and there was no cost involved, nothing. I know other people probably wouldn't charge for that either, but it was so comfortable to make that appointment through the Apple support app, and it was just so comfortable. And when I actually had stuff like glass repairs on like my iPhone 7 Plus, it all went super quick. Whenever I had like my batteries changed when they were like super cheap, that was great. The waiting times have been long just one time. So yeah, definitely a lot of kudos to the Apple support system that Apple has built. By the way, this is why I think Apple does not like a lot of right-to-repair stuff, the DIY stuff primarily, even though they are now backing like California's law for it. But I think that Apple is thinking like, well, we've invested billions and we have like thousands of stores relying on us to keep them basically exclusive, and we've cultivated a culture of quality control for that stuff. If all of that starts to fall apart, because Apple is not a charity, it's not like Apple will subsidize any of those stores that rely on like repairs and stuff. So, and for everything else, people will feel more comfortable going to the actual Apple store anyway whenever they can. So I think that Apple looks at all this and is like afraid of losing it. Not because it actually makes them a lot of money. Don't get me, like, I know this is like a conspiracy theory. It's just as stupid as like Apple is keeping Lightning because made for eye accessories make them so much money, even though it's like an infinitesimally small part, and they will still be able to sell you USB-C accessories down the road anyway. But that's not the point. The point is that those things make Apple money because people associate some kind of quality with Apple that then keeps them on buying iPhones, iPads, Macs, Apple Watches, AirPods, Apple TVs. It's such a big thing for Apple that if you go into like an authorized shop, that shop can repair it, can give you like buying advice, can help you with the OS, not just the hardware. You don't necessarily have to always send it in. Sometimes they will do it in-house, which again, with other manufacturers, that's just simply not the case. If you buy something from like a third-party store, it's very likely that that manufacturer will not even look at your device. They will like say, oh no, you bought it through them, manage all repairs through them. That's not how Apple rolls. Like obviously you will get the best experience if you have like Apple Care, but you will get just a better experience with Apple, bar none. You would probably have to get like the craziest kind of insurance, but even then, insurance is not always customer support. Insurance will like replace your devices and stuff, but it will not guarantee that you will always have like an easily accessible expert actually helping you. And that was a long diversion too, so let's keep going.
Because Apple stores are everywhere, and Apple controls that entire experience for better or for worse, so they get to do great work with customers. So it's just for people who are not enthusiasts, who just want to get the thing and not think about it anymore, they pretty much always go with the iPhone. So ease of use is a checkbox for the iPhone. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, get subscribed. Why not? It's free. All right, so we got to talk about updates. So number 4 is
easy win
support.
for
This is
iPhone.
something that I would classify as kind of underrated, just because I don't think enough people buy their new phone that they plan on having for years with this in mind. I think having the latest and greatest updates, software.
I actually do, and that's because I know that every phone that I know will stay for pretty much its lifetime inside my family. So for example, my mom is like using my old 10s Max, and she will get my 13 Pro Max. That 10s Max will then go to my grandma, who doesn't obviously care about how new her phone is, but she has like a Galaxy S8 Plus, right? And that's fine and good, she's used to it, but an iPhone will be much better. Also, like the Galaxy S8 has like developed like nasty burn-in, even though she doesn't even use it that much. So that's another point there. But like the fact that the iPhone still works so well, has like the latest operating system and stuff, that will be a huge plus to me whenever I go to her and help her with like some stuff on her smartphone. When if I buy her like an Apple Watch, so that she has like stuff like fall detection and other health features, obviously that helps that she then has an iPhone. So yeah, like, and I have like my iPhone 7 Plus still working for me, and it obviously it's not on the latest operating system anymore, but it got darn close. And it still works really well, and it is getting still security updates. So yeah, it's not even close. And then support, I've already outlined like my own personal positive experiences with Apple support, which contrast really starkly to pretty much everything I've heard from like family and friends who have like Android devices, unless they bought like directly from Samsung and then like send it in. But again, whenever you have like a software based problem or something, it's not like anybody will actually help you that much with it. Even with stuff like there's it's like so many like unique bugs, I would say, on Android sometimes, where they will just be like, oh, the Galaxy A53 has like dead bug on Android 13.3 point whatever, right, with like one UI blah blah blah, and like nobody will know about that bug because it's such a small subset of users, while on iOS the install base of people who have the exact same phone on the exact same operating system is so large that even like sometimes you will know, oh, it's a smaller bug, but it will likely get fixed, or you know that like, oh, it's like now really unexpected, maybe it has something to do with hardware. And sometimes when it has something to do with hardware, you will very quickly see like community forums pop up where people discuss like, oh, this is a widespread issue in this and that phone. And that obviously works far better if you have people with more of the same device and more of the same device on the same operating system.
And security patches as quick as possible and as long as possible should be a priority, but it usually isn't for people. Either way, it's kind of a mixed bag across the board. In Android world, some companies make no promises, or they kind of break their promises. Some have short promises, and some will actually extend out to promising 3 to 4 years of software updates. Weirdly, Samsung right now is the undisputed king of Android software updates, with some rumors of maybe Google catching back up.
Yeah, I know Samsung is like now, I believe, at up to 4 years promised, right? And 5 years of security stuff, which, by the way, is like 2 years less than you get with iPhones, where you usually get like full 6 years of software support. And then you get like up to a decade of security updates. And the other point also being like that you also still get like actual meaningful support because there's this large install base. And the other point is updates do launch simultaneously on on iOS devices, while with Android you have like this weird schedule, like, oh, first the Galaxy S23 series gets an Android 14 update, then the S22, and then eventually the S21. And then about the S20, well, we kind of promise it, maybe we won't, right? So yeah, the problem will then also be like, well, then you get like some of the updates like 6 to 9 months later. I know it's gotten better, but also that still only applies to like the high-end devices. Well, on the iPhone, because the iPhone SE uses like the same chip as many other high-end iPhones, it does not have that kind of problem. Origin, dang it, an emergency came up. I hope to be back before it ends. I hate my luck. Yeah, you have not been unfortunately able to join us for a while, even though I know you want to, but obviously like any kind of emergency, personal, work, whatever, it comes first. So yeah, take care, Origin. Maybe I'll see you back. Maybe the stream will like last another 40 minutes or so. So let's see how it goes.
But Samsung announced in 2019 that all devices in 2019 or later will get 4 years of security updates, and some flagships will even get 5. But none of them really come close to the iPhone. When iOS 17 comes out this fall, every iPhone back to the iPhone XR from 2018 is officially supported and going to get the latest version. That's 5 major software version updates.
Exactly, and 5 major software version updates are actually 6 years, right? When you consider like how that goes, because you don't just get the latest version of the operating system of like iOS 17. You will then get iOS 17 until like iOS 17.7. So well, with sometimes Android, you will then get like stuck on halfway through. There's no logical follow through on every subversion of the operating system, and sometimes you will not like get like the absolute like latest like skin as well. That's also a little bit of a problem. Obviously Apple also cuts out features, right? That's part of just newer devices being more powerful. Apple of course also looking for reasons to differentiate their phones, but overall my point still very, very much stands here. stands.
I don't think there are any Android phones from 2018
no.
that are going to get the latest version of Android.
Like, would technically the Fairphone qualify with what they promise? Though it's never like the real version, I would say, of like the latest Android. It's like such a scattershot approach that they have with like updating their phones. I don't trust it in general. I also don't like the Fairphone in general. I like the core idea. I think it's very poorly executed, but I think that's kind of the only thing. And then you could make the argument that maybe you could like mod it and basically jailbreak it, but
14 when it comes out. So this one easily goes to the vertically integrated Apple phone with the Apple software all day. So now my number 5 category is apps. This one is actually kind of fascinating. So obviously we have our standard, like our apps that we all use every single day on our phones that we're used to, but then sometimes it's fun just sort of popping around in their respective app stores, discovering new things, finding fun apps. And at this point, they are both flourishing. There's millions of apps now. It's over 3.5 million apps in the Google Play Store and over 1.5 million in Apple's App Store, which, if you just stop there, looks like a win for Android, but quality over quantity, my friends. Quality over quantity. Basically,
a friend of the show, Krukov, is joining the chat saying that he tried to make friends with iPhone, but that he failed. Yeah, I mean, to each their own. I don't think there's a definitive answer for anybody. I would just say that overall, I don't think anybody is forced. But I do think there's a lot of Android users who do feel comfortable with switching eventually to iOS. Well, I think there are very, very few iPhone users who genuinely think about switching to Android, unless we're really talking about like a very interesting Android device. Like for some reason, like the Galaxy Flip devices are attractive to people. I don't know why. I hate the Flip. I think if anything, a Fold would be much more likely to get me to switch or to dual wield again, as you can also see Marquez doing. But it is what it is. People like what they like.
Every major app is available for both platforms, which means there are many more, niche apps or relatively unknown possible diamonds in the rough on the Google Play Store, sure. But the difference is when you actually talk to these developers and observe the cycle of like how they get made and how these apps get updated, the truth is so many of them are prioritizing iOS. And really it's purely for efficiency. Think about it. If you just have to update one version of your app and it works with all the newest iPhones instantly and works perfectly for millions of people who all have basically the same aspect.
I would say Apple has also done a really good job, which, I mean, Android kind of started it, that kind of like making your app like really like, basically you can stretch it, you can make it longer, right, so that the text then automatically switches and that UI elements fall into the right place. Android had to have some kind of solution for it from the beginning, because they obviously had so many different display sizes, display resolutions and stuff like that. But with iOS you have now a native versatility solution, which means that, for one, there are not that many different pixel densities across like iOS and iPadOS, right? It's mainly like the difference on iPhone between like 326 ppi and 400 ppi LCDs, and then you get like your sharper OLEDs. And then on iPadOS, you have like the sharper screen on the iPad mini, but then basically everything else is almost the exact same pixel density, just different display sizes. And of course, throughout it all, they all use the same kind of processors with the same kind of cache and RAM structure, with the same kind of battery management, with the same kind of integration of sharing tools, camera permissions for location stuff, etc., etc. It's all just so comfortable, from what I heard from developers, that it's kind of a no-brainer. Even if it's not like Android makes it particularly difficult, but even with like Swift UI and nowadays, there's just so much that you sometimes can experiment with on iOS and still have like an actually like working app. Often if you try to like integrate like really cutting edge tech and development tools into an app, it will not like work really well. On iOS it does, because even the experimental stuff is kind of like managed by Apple. So yeah, it is definitely a point in favor of the iPhone. First of all, developers do prioritize it. Second, overall development is still somewhat easier. And third, just the like whenever there's like an update, it's also much easier to communicate to developers. Like, oh, iOS 17 is now coming out. Every iPhone up until to the iPhone XS and XR is getting it, so they can get ready for it. While on Android, it's like, oh, Android 14 is coming out, the Pixel is getting it, and then eventually some other phones, but with their own skins on top. So yeah, of course, it's a point in favor of iOS, not even close, unless you want to count the fact that like Google Play has emulators in it. Also, by the way, I know people like call out the App Store sometimes for having like garbage and bloat in it. Like Android's Google Play Store has like 3 times as many apps in it. Can you imagine just how much unbelievable trash there is there? And people don't seem to care. Also, Apple is now doing a pretty good job on like eliminating like really garbage apps. They have some kind of AI tool for it.
Of course you'd do it. Flip that switch. But with Android, there are naturally many more complexities. There are a bunch of different devices that all have different aspect ratios and different pixel densities and different feature support and even foldables. And it's like, it's a lot more work
Pre-watch,
to get
but
all of those
definitely not
users
pre-watch.
up to date with the same level of optimization. It's a lot of different switches to flip. So a lot of them just don't go through all of that, or they take way longer to. So the number of titles is one thing, but is it the same Instagram app on both iPhone and Android? Is it the same Threads app on each one? As someone who's been carrying and using both phones and often using the same app on both phones,
Let me guess. It's technically the same app, but it will work better on iPhone, will often be smoother, it will use less battery life, and then sharing stuff will often work significantly fast. Like, don't forget, I know like iOS gets like fun of for like the lack of widgets, but guys, like, remember how like the Android share sheet looked a couple of years ago, where it like was taking sometimes literal seconds for it to load up? Especially if you had customized it in any way and had like a lot of like recently like sent to like when it comes to people that you communicated with, it was atrocious. And sometimes like Google's own apps inside iOS try to give you like that old shitty share sheet that's like limited to 5 apps, and then there's like an extra share button that you click to get the actual good system-wide share sheet. So like it's definitely on Google there. It's not like Apple has done a great job from basically the day one, and Android has basically done a poor job since day one and only recently fixed it, but not very comprehensively as some iOS apps are showing.
I have a first-hand experience of knowing that often, even with some of Google's own apps, the updates are prioritized on the iPhone. They come first.
Yeah, like YouTube Studio is like notorious for like that it works better on iPhone often, which is so funny to me.
Before they come to Android. I wish that wasn't true. I wish they were just as easy to do one or the other, but that's just the truth of it. So the slight app advantage is going to go to the iPhone here. And interestingly enough, this also applies generally to accessories. Again, same reason, same efficiency.
Yeah, I guess the only part that you can is the only counter that you could say here is like USB-C on Android, but again, that will be a moot point in a month.
But that's a win for the iPhone. So then, category number 6. I'm going to go a little more subjective with this one, but I still think
Android
it matters,
will win that point because of the existence of foldables, because of more vendors
honestly,
making
I get
it.
pretty excited for a lot of.
I completely would disagree, obviously, on like a personal level, but I think if you try to like dissect it for like the vast majority of people, though kind of the viewership on like Apple stuff on YouTube would tell a different picture, but yeah, I think this should go to Android. However, as he's like showing even here with like that MagSafe accessory on top of the Mac, I think there's a big point in like that sometimes really small quality of life things, because they are get a push to every iPhone, to every part of the ecosystem basically, they can create a lot more excitement from just how more usable they are. Also, now I'm thinking of getting the white Belkin one. I have the black one, which I wonder how dirty that one gets on time, but it looks really stunning there.
Different new tech these days, and actually because there's only like 1 or 2 new iPhone drops every year, it's actually very easy to get hype built up for the new iPhone. But it's definitely a different type of excitement with the massive variety of new innovations and things that come to Android phones all the time.
Foldables.
Like, if you just are interested in folding phones,
yeah,
well, there's more Android releases than ever for that. Want a gaming phone? There's going to be an Android for that. Do you want a headphone jack? Do you want a compact phone? Do you want the world's fastest?
That's versatility. I like, if you're a weirdo who gets excited about charging speeds in a smartphone, go plug that USB-C cable in your ass at that point. Sorry, I don't care. This is not excitement to me. If Apple were on stage and was like talking about charging speeds, again, the reason why I like cover charging speeds and data transfer speeds on my channel is because those are news, right? But I never lie to you and tell you that I'm so excited about the iPhone charging quicker. No, I'm very happy with how quickly it charges. The only thing that I demand in terms of charging, that it never charges slower, which doesn't mean that it would go down from 27 watts to like 20 watts, but that it means if I get like a larger battery, inside my phone, I want the charging speed to keep up with that, whether it is through higher peak charging, like for example going from 27 to 35 watts, or giving it much better cooling so that peak of 27 watts can be maintained for much longer. But anybody who gets excited for all of that stuff, it reminds me of like when people were excited for like 3D smartphones, and we all know what that happened. Do you remember when smartphones were supposed to come with like a holo projector with them? Do you remember when like people were like strapping Androids to their face because they had like better VR support for it? It all dies down in the end. People use smartphones like a phone with smart features. They don't actually use it like a completely separate type of object. Yes, they will use it like a camera, they will use it like a speaker, but those are things that are fundamentally interwoven in the smartphone experience. They do not always want a phone that then becomes a tablet, then becomes a laptop and stuff like that. For the vast majority, a smartphone is a smartphone is a smartphone, and that often is an iPhone.
Fastest charging. Do you want some interesting new unique designs or materials or textures or experimental features? Like, that is the world of Android. And if you think about it, seriously think about this, most of the interesting excitement around every new iPhone.
By the way, I think I might end up perfectly predicting each point. Like, I know that it will end 4-3 for the iPhone. So I assume the iPhone wins the ecosystem point and whatever the last point was. But yeah, like I basically perfectly predicted how it's gonna pan out.
Launch. The question really is this new iPhone going to get a new feature that's been in Android phones for years?
That's not remotely true. Like, look at something like MagSafe or 3D Touch. Or even like the fingerprint sensor in the iPhone 5S. I know we'll be like, oh, 3 features over a decade or whatever, but like 3D Touch, people are still bemoaning that it's gone because it actually worked well, because it was actually innovative and fun to use. Like it was like a lot like adaptive triggers on like the PlayStation 5, where like people will like say, oh, it's so unnecessary, it's such a gimmick. But of course it's a gimmick. It's a $1,000 device. Why not have some kind of fun gimmicks inside it, right? And the fingerprint sensor, there were other phones with fingerprint sensors before it. Nothing worked ever as well as the 5S in its era. Like, it took like Android 2 years to give you something even remotely close. And just in like the way how iPhones are now super water resistant and stuff, technically way better than most other Android devices. Speakers, like, there are very few Android devices, unless they're like 50% larger than a Pro Max iPhone, in terms of like, they will not be much heavier actually, because they're made out of plastic often, but like you will not get the same kind of speaker quality. But that's less exciting, right? Because it's not technically something new, it's something improved. So like microphone quality is something that people have historically ignored, and I would say that usually it's like the Ultra Galaxies and like the iPhones that get like an absolute definitive win there, but it's not as flashy even as saying like, oh, my phone charges at 120 watts. Of course not, but it will be much, much more relevant to much, much more people. Again, my core philosophy is utilitarianism, so to me it matters that something actually will have more utility for more people.
Like, are we finally going to get USB-C on an iPhone? Are we finally going to get fast charging on an iPhone? Are we finally going to get a 5x camera? And so just for that...
Also, by the way, like 5x cameras is like... I know it's like technically a feature, but implementation actually matters. Like the first gen of periscope cameras absolutely sucked. They've gotten better. They're still, to my opinion, mostly only usable in like really good light. Like the best kind of pictures that I've seen are like some Disney World with Disneyland pictures where you were like, oh, look, I can like see the tower in full quality when I zoom in. But like in indoors it's basically unusable because it has like this bad aperture in comparison to a regular 3x zoom and stuff like that. So again, it's not like those features are like slam dunks by any means. And I have said that I will not be super excited about a 5 or 6x zoom with the new iPhone if it's not a variable zoom camera. Like, I will actually detract points there from, like, I do believe the next iPhone could be close to, like, 90, 95 or something, but I will take points away for that.
Novelty reason alone. The excitement category. That's definitely got to go to Android. So that brings us to my last category, number 7, ecosystem. We've heard this word before, ecosystem. So, okay, say what you want, but there are a lot of people who will not buy a phone if it doesn't have iMessage or FaceTime, whatever it is.
No, this is a US only problem. I'm a hardcore iPhone user, right? I have gotten people to buy iPhones who never expected to buy an iPhone. Yet until this day, I use iMessage as like my least used messenger. Well, it is highly used because I use it with my mom. But like for most people, I use Telegram, Signal, and then to a smaller degree WhatsApp. But WhatsApp is like really impacted by its trash image quality when it comes to sharing. So that is why I really encourage people to not use WhatsApp. But still, I sometimes have to rely on WhatsApp. So I, as a like iPhone user, use 4, I don't even know which fingers I'm showing up here, 4 messengers. Like, nobody outside the US, and Silicon Magic, you're confirming that to me, nobody outside the US is like so locked in. I think it might come down to like the US, like many people in the US being like dogmatic about so many things, like sometimes about religion, sometimes about politics, right? They will be like dogmatic about like green or blue bubbles. I don't give a fuck about green or blue bubbles. I care about blue bubbles because I like how iMessage works. I like the great image quality that I get with it. I like how it integrates with Find My for people and stuff like that. This is why I like iMessage. I don't use it because it's locked down. In fact, I would prefer for more people to start using it, but they just don't. And this is like, I have never heard anybody tell me, even an iPhone user, like, let's do a FaceTime, right? I actually have a Signal group that is called FaceTime Calls with 2 of my best friends who happen to have a MacBook and an iPad. So we do FaceTime calls there, and we call that group there just so we can chat about it and organize basically the call. But nobody, it's not like we wouldn't be able to use Skype or the calling feature on WhatsApp, which actually would be probably easier because the video calling feature on WhatsApp, because they have like Android smartphones. So to me, this is like so ridiculous. It's like ecosystem is the iPhone ecosystem is not propped up by iMessage and FaceTime. FaceTime and iMessage are propped up by iOS. It's completely circular logic by those people to think that like, oh, people are sticking with iOS because of green or blue bubbles. No, people just gotten used to green or blue bubbles because they are so good on iOS. And because Apple knows that, that's why they're only on iOS. But it's not like people will be like, oh, my friend, like maybe some people in the US will think like that, but nobody outside the US will ever think like, oh, my friend uses an iPhone, so I need to get an iPhone because that friend only wants to chat with me through iMessage. No, people already obviously communicate with each other through other stuff, even if it's sometimes just email. So just chill.
And Apple
I hate this point so much.
Weaponized this and built walls around this. And
no, Apple has. This is so stupid. Apple has never built walls around it. Those are iOS exclusive features because they were designed for iOS in iOS. Like, in fact, Apple has made them more open. You can do like now FaceTime web calls on Android. No, Apple has not built walls around it. It's just Apple put those features into iOS, which, yes, happens to be a walled operating system, if you want to perceive it that way. But Apple never once took any features away from you.
Close it off as much as possible. Technically, you can join a FaceTime from an Android phone, but can't start one. So I made an entire video just about Apple's ecosystem. Hate it or love it, it is important to some people. Now the thing is, Apple is not the only one with an ecosystem. Like, look at Samsung, for example. Apple happens to build bigger walls around keeping people into their ecosystem.
No, like, I see like Android users with AirPods in their ears. I know the Apple Watch is like locked into the iPhone, but that has everything to do with what the Apple Watch is. If you actually look at like a Samsung watch, you will see just how much better it works with a Samsung device, and then it works decently well with other Android phones because those are still run Android. But it's not like you can just connect it to the problem is people think that Android is open by itself because there are so many vendors that use Android. But it's not like you would be able to like super easily like use a Galaxy Watch with like Windows Phone suddenly if Windows Phone had survived. There are still walls, it's just they're less perceivable because you can still choose between different vendors. With Apple makes you choose between them and also them.
But Samsung has a lot of equivalents to all the same pieces. Like, you could get a Samsung Galaxy S flagship, and you could quickly and easily connect your Galaxy Buds, just like AirPods. You put on your Galaxy Watch with a lot of the same features as the Apple Watch. You tether to a Samsung Tab just for entertainment purposes, like an iPad, but then you get a Galaxy Book Pro with cellular internet sharing and wireless quick share, just like a MacBook Pro with AirDrop. You see where I'm going?
Wait, what operating system is that running? Wait, what?
Going and going.
Silicon Magic, well, I can see his point. iCloud client for Windows, for example, totally sucks. Really? Does it though? I've used it. It's decent. Like, also, by the way, I think the problem often with I mean, like iCloud has gotten way better. It now integrates with a ton of like Windows 11 stuff pretty natively nowadays. They made like Microsoft made a big deal about this. Also, like, you can use like iCloud stuff through the browser. It actually works pretty well. I often recommend people to just use iCloud stuff for other operating systems through the web. It's been really good. I also manage like sometimes like some data stuff for friends and stuff, and I always go through the browser because I never would like log in with their ID into my own phone. It would need to like restructure everything.
I'm sure Samsung is eventually going to come out with their smart speaker to match the HomePod. It's totally coming.
Yeah, we totally aren't waiting for like 5 years at this point.
Paper, the idea is they are surprisingly congruent. So the way I see it, at the time of this recording, because this could change very soon in the next couple weeks, but the main advantages of Samsung's ecosystem would be things like, one, USB-C across literally everything, so you can use one charging cable for
except
all of your
the
stuff.
watch, I guess.
Two, they make more different versions of devices that fit into the ecosystem.
That's not true. Like they have like a ton of different buds. Most of them are like experiments from older generations, and then they have like 3 differently sized tablets, which, I mean, like, if you know how many tablets Apple builds, it's actually too many for many people. So I would not say that they're building more devices here. And then Apple builds like the Mac Mini, Mac Mini with like more processing power, the Mac Studio, the Mac Pro, the MacBook Air, the MacBook Air 15-inch. I did count the 13-inch one. I'm not even counting like the older M1 stuff. Like, oh, okay, I could count like the iMac still. Then like they have the 14-inch MacBook Pro, the 16-inch MacBook Pro, right? And then of course we can go through the iPad, but like with the watch, sometimes Samsung does like really decent updates. Sometimes they will just ignore a year pretty much, right? and it's been also inconsistent with first like Tizen OS, now we're at Galaxy Wear stuff. So, and that transition wasn't like super fluid sometimes. So yeah, Apple's ecosystem is way more coherent, and it's also really extensive. Like sometimes you also can just get like different earbuds, like that don't have to be AirPods.
Like there are a ton of different phones. And
oh yeah. If you want to compare it from the phone perspective, that's true. From the watch perspective, it's actually not true. Not at all, actually. Like there's the there's the Apple Watch SE, the Apple Watch Series 9, all with different sizes. The Apple Watch Series 9 also comes like with different materials between aluminum and stainless steel. Previously we had like Apple Watch editions. Now we have the Apple Watch Ultra. With the Galaxy we get like the regular in different sizes, and then like the classic with like the rotating bezel. It's not true. They make way more buds because they have like the Galaxy Buds Live or something they were called, that are still old. But like if you were comparing just useless stuff that nobody bought, like it's not like that's really relevant in the overall market. People will buy like the Galaxy Buds Plus, not the old shit.
Is in different headphones and laptops, etc. So there's more flexibility.
No, there's actually not more laptops on the Samsung side. There are actually entire like regions that don't get any Samsung PCs anymore. And even then, like Samsung's PCs are not what they used to be. Like that's simply not true. They're not as versatile as they used to be. Also, Windows does not integrate as well with Android as iOS does with macOS. I know it has gotten like better, but I think that those points are actually really far-fetched. I think you could make the overall argument that if you like look at all vendors, you get like a lot of versatility. And as I've said, I could give Android like almost an extra separate point for the pricing of the ecosystem through that versatility, through that choice. But just bringing up Samsung and saying they have like basically a response to everything from Apple is objectively untrue. Just look at something like tvOS. It's like, I know Samsung will have like smart TVs. That is definitely not the same as a set-top box that you can... A set-top box, it's an old name, but like a smart TV box that you can connect to any kind of TV. None of it is as fast, as fluid. None of them get like maniacally the new operating system in the same way like an A8 running TV, Apple TV still does. So yeah, it's not the same, not even close.
In hardware choice, classic Android. Plus Samsung also makes other stuff that connects, like dishwashers.
No. Those things connect with anything. Like I know that because I have an LG TV and I have an app that connects to it. Like I know you could like argue maybe that like integrates really well with like the home app, I guess, but it all runs better through like the third-party apps anyway. So no. Also, you can control a lot of that stuff with smart speakers these days. Also, some of them have like smart speakers and stuff like that. Also, like Samsung's like food management stuff in like fridges is like trash. Like, how often would you really like remote control a washer and a dryer? Also, it's like really bad to put them on top of each other. So that's just one point. I guess I would like to remote control my stove because I have a little bit of OCD and I really would always like to know that it's off. And like remote controlling the dishwasher just sounds psychotic because you put something in, then you you turn it on, and then you take it out. What would you remote control with a dishwasher? We are over-digitalized as a society.
Refrigerators. But then, the advantages of Apple's ecosystem, not just in the US, but especially here, are, first of all, ease of use and seamlessness. Like, it is genuinely crazy how good some of the continuity stuff is in Apple's ecosystem. Like, something like Continuity Camera is so sick every time. You just push one button to use a super high-quality iPhone camera as your webcam. It works very, very well. But then the popularity factor especially in the US, makes things like FaceTime and iMessage and the Find My network super strong. So I can make a whole video on this. I could put up the strengths and weaknesses and put up these two ecosystems up against each other. But as of right now, they're both very strong, and I'm going to give the slight edge to Apple's just because, one, I'm in the US and that advantage is strong, but two, just because of the seamlessness and how well things are integrated and the continuity features are unreal. So if we tally these all up here, you can see that the objective winner in 4 out of the 7 categories that I made up is the iPhone. But, put your pitchforks down, guess what? There is no, as you've probably picked up from the beginning of this video, there is no objective winner to a decision as personal as this one, and when the options are this close. You probably already know. If you've been watching my videos, you know I main an Android phone most of the time alongside an iPhone, but my main phone and my main customized setups are on the Android phone, so what gives? Like, picking one de facto winner kind of suggests that the one winner is best for everyone, but we already know that there's some people who literally don't care about some features that some others would say they can't live without. So, I've devised a very basic system to help you pick your winner for yourself. And it's really quite simple.
I think this is where like some of the MKBHD neutrality comes into it. I mean, he always like dual wields, right? That's what I call it, by the way. I don't know if like the term is still like relevant. It was like relevant like 10 years ago in like Apple forums, I remember. But like and he has like a customized setup on Android. I would say the reason why he does is probably because you need to customize more on the Pixel Fold before you actually feel comfortable with. I mean, he did kind of break down that some of the original features, the way they're set up, are kind of unintuitive. And then the iPhone just works, right? But yeah, it is an attempt to still say like, oh, but it depends, right? Even though we deliberately wanted to have 7 points so that so that it couldn't be a tie, but now we are basically making it a tie. I don't care. I don't think it's bad, but it is a little funny. Silicon Magic, I hate this, the ultimate fight, but there's no clear winner. I get it. Again, I think we have a very similar intuitive understanding of the core problem here.
All you have to do is put these 7 categories in order of importance to you, and then rate each one of them.
Nope. That's actually a wrong approach. I will quickly move the camera. The problem with that is because a lot of people will like put features, I think, at the top, right? And then customization might probably come in somewhere in the middle for many people, but then excitement might not matter at all, because you probably are not very excited because you pretty much know which phone you're getting, and ease of use might not matter to you that much because you know how to use your phone you're familiar with. But an ecosystem, to me, might be the most important point, right? And some will be like, well, that's what MKBHD is saying. My problem with that is like features. To me, there are some features on iOS that matters way more to me, and a lot of those features have a lot to do with the ecosystem that simply do not exist on Android in an easily accessible way. So now those features actually intertwine. So the thing that I would probably like, I would recommend people to just not use MKBHD's criteria here and to basically make up your own in terms of like, think of your phone, go through the day on what you actually use it for, and then think what of those things, so many things, are unique to the operating system that you use, or is uniquely easy to do on your operating system, right? And then try to basically like rank those features, and then in contrast, if you have any knowledge of the basically the competitive operating system, put on features that you consider they're like, for one, the features that you use on your phone and you know are also easily to replicate on the other phone, just cross them out, right? There's no need to compare all the basics. And then with the other thing, just like structure what matters to you or from your phone in order that is somewhat unique to your phone, and then create a list. Oh, again, I forgot that you cannot see my mouse, but it's not like I will put on a note once again on the screen. It's you can imagine what I mean, right? Put on the most important things from your phone that are unique to your phone in a list, and then put in comparison a list to what you consider would be unique to the other operating system that would interest you, and then structure what actually might matter to you in the end. I know it would ask some level of abstraction because you probably are not as familiar with the features on the other operating system, but I mean, you would have to be familiar to work with MKBHD's list. It's not like his list is like so self-explanatory either. So yeah, that's it. So there's no easy solution, and there's this maybe I will react someday to like Mr. Who's the Boss, like Mac versus Windows video. No, definitely not today, but I think he was like similarly non-committal. And I guess that's true because they don't want to actually piss off any of their users. So again, it is what it is.
Let's say on a scale from 1 to 5. So give them a 1 to 5 point rating based on how much.
No. Try to do it more with a rank choice voting. Don't give it points, but basically like eliminate what like where it loses, and it's so difficult because I have like this idea in my head, but I would need to like draw it down first. But like if if one side wins over the other, right? In either point, then you basically have, and you also need to be able to like be able to decide on a draw sometimes. Because that will allow you to then really focus on the breakdown of those features, right? And I don't mean like features as features, I mean like those individual points. But like if for example like apps, you decide that iOS wins, try to actually make maybe a list of like the actual apps that you need, because you might find that regardless of how many points you want to give apps in general, maybe in the end it won't actually matter with your use case. But maybe for somebody like me who uses like a lot of Apple Arcade stuff and shares that like with family through Apple One, maybe apps was like relatively low on my list, but I find myself that I don't just care about app optimization, but that I might care about specific apps, specific options to like have apps without ads and something, that it then like rises through the ranks much more than it did when I was just thinking of, oh, how many apps are on the Play Store, how many apps are on the iPhone, right? So again, it's hard to explain what I have in mind. Maybe at some point I should do like a response video to this where I present like my own system, but I think I would do that only once the channel is pretty large. I definitely need a lot of feedback from the community on something like this.
Much you care about it. So here, for me, I care the most about customization.
Really? I would have never guessed that that's his first point. I thought that was just like something where Android could get like an easy first point, so that was like easy to put up front. Well, customization to me would probably be like in the bottom, but then again, customization also depends. Like we are talking about iOS still having customization, so it's not like I would be able to give like full 5 points to Android. It would probably be more like giving 2.25 points to iPhone and 2.75 points to Android.
And features. Then I care a lot about apps, and excitement and updates are decently important, but then in my daily driver, ease of use and ecosystem aren't that big of a deal.
Really? Wait, ecosystem is not important? Really? Well, I guess he uses like a lot of third-party stuff in general. Well, he does have a smartwatch, doesn't he? He always has like an Apple Watch. So ecosystem, I guess he's saying that like he does not see like a unique point in like Apple's advantage in the ecosystem, because he could like theoretically also put on like a Galaxy Watch. Silicon, that's of no interest to me. The most I ever customized on a smartphone was changing the wallpaper. Well, then you would be really unhappy with the original iPhone OS that he for some reason mentioned here. Yeah, like customize it. Also, like giving it full 5 points here is so weird because it's not like iOS would have like zero customization. It just would have a little less. And he never does, by the way, that crazy Android stuff. He never changes all of his icons fully from what he ever shows on his phone. And like features I get because he does like foldable stuff. So I think that could also partially go into excitement, though I don't think that excitement is a point at all. Excitement is like a media thing. It's not a device thing whatsoever. Apps, I'm kind of surprised that apps don't get like a full 5, given like the social media relevance for him probably. Updates, yeah, he keeps phones for a year and then he gets just like the newest stuff. Ease of use, I guess it mostly like depends on like the latest features for him, but like yeah, the ecosystem at 1 is just mind-blowing to me. Yeah, but even that, what do you mean it's not that important to you, Silicon? Do you mean the wallpaper, or do you mean like my breakdown of the ecosystem stuff right now? There is this small delay that I just cannot change with OBS and how YouTube works, so I apologize when I sometimes don't quite know what your latest message refers to.
I've got a mixed bag. So then I just give the amount of points earned to each winner of that category. So the winner, for me, is clearly Android. But hey, for you, maybe you care a lot about ecosystem, and maybe nothing else. I'm sure you know someone like this. Then the iPhone will clearly be calling your name. Or if you're the type who wants all the features and excitement in the world, well then Android probably is what's in your pocket. You might even have your own category you could add in that's heavily weighted. I kind of see it like buying a car, like maybe cool factor is in there. Have at it.
Oh no, cool. Oh no. The cool factor is how people buy Galaxy Flips. Please don't. Please don't do coolness. Yeah, the wallpaper. By the way, that's also true. Like, I cannot show you my phone because my phone is currently what's recording my face, because that's part of an ecosystem feature. But yeah, I actually never cared that much for wallpapers either. I would be perfectly fine with always just sticking with the default wallpaper, or I would not even be that angry to just look at the black screen. For one thing that I absolutely hate is like putting pictures of people behind apps. This is, by the way, why when iOS 7 launched, it had like this parallax effect. So if you like move your phone, the gyro recognizes it, and you can see a little bit more of the wallpaper behind the icons. I know technically you can do also like gyro recognition in Android wallpapers. I remember I had like the Galaxy S2 or something, and it had like a whole galaxy across many wallpaper screens, and it would slightly shift how the stars are seen. It's cool. I don't need it. I don't even care that much about wallpapers either, to be honest. And that's not an excuse of iOS, because iOS have had like wallpapers for years and years and years. But I guess you could say like, oh, iOS does not have like moving wallpapers, though they do now to a degree. So it's all a give and take. Like, it is what it is. I say that a lot, but I think some things are like wildly overstated, and like bringing up stuff like coolness to me is just that's something I really cannot like tolerate at all.
Phone is one of the most personal decisions you make. I've said this before, but like it's the thing you spent.
Yeah, who cares about choosing your partner if you can decide which OS to choose?
Your money on, and you carry everywhere you go. And so that's why people get so worked up about this side versus.
By the way, I think that this is why I've said in the beginning. I know why I've said it in the beginning, but it lines up with it. I believe that MKBHD expected more spice from this. I think he expected a lot more people to be a little more angry, but then he equivocated so much in the end with like that point system and stuff like that in the end he didn't end up saying anything. He just basically basically gave us his opinion on which individual points he considers iOS better and at which individual points he considers Android better. He did not actually give us any definitive statement on what he considers better. I mean, he said for himself that he probably considers Android like more fitting because it would technically get more points the way he counted it for himself. But that's just, and most people who watch this video will not fixate on that. They will just see, oh, iOS slightly won, and then he gave us 1,000 points on why Android could also win, so it basically doesn't matter. This is why this video now has 2 million views, and I wouldn't be surprised if he expected it to perform twice as good or twice as well or something like that.
That side, but at the end of the day, the winner, not to be cheesy,
it depends. It depends on you, or it's what would he say? Well, Linus would say like it depends, right? It's up to you.
Is us, because they're competing against each other to get better.
That's actually also not quite true anymore, unfortunately. I would almost say I think there are people who are just guaranteed to like buy the latest Samsung flagship, and there are people and then there's like China, where people will like support local brands anyway, and then I think there are people who will just buy an iPhone regardless. So I actually would say competition is actually the thing that, despite that like divide of like 15 to 20% iOS market share, around 80% Android market share, I think competition is actually something we have lost a lot. I don't think as many people are like switching from Android, but they're pretty much replaced by like newcomers who like buy cheap phones in like emerging markets. So yeah, the overall market share, I don't see much switching. It probably like has an impact on like very developed countries where like iOS is like really dominating in like the US, for example. But then you have like Europe that actually have a lot of financial power, and still like most countries end up with like 75% Android market share.
Hopefully win you over, and that's the way it should be.
And it's slightly overly optimistic. MKBHD does kind of feel like a little bit of a neoliberal who will like say like, oh, competition is good, which I mean, yeah, competition is good, but he will sometimes claim that in a very naive way, as if like all competition is created equal or something.
Thanks for watching. Catch you next one.
Right?
Peace.
Oh yeah, he does P. I guess I internalized that MKBHD peace thing, and this is why I started doing the live long and prosper thing, and I'm comfortable in keeping it, by the way. This will be now part of my channel. I'm pretty used to it. I guess I do have both an opener and a closer for YouTube at this point. So guys, this is it. I guess I've analyzed it kind of in the end already, where I said that like it's very non-committal and it's therefore not as spicy as some people wanted it to be. I apologize to anybody who couldn't join. I know more people wanted to. Some already like let me know through Twitter that you couldn't join, and obviously Origin like typed here that like he wanted to stay for longer but couldn't. So a big shout out to you if you like rewatch this video on the VOD, or to anybody who wanted to watch it anyway. Thank you guys for all the support. This is the kind of content that I really like doing, because I think it's the right kind of controversial. It doesn't like forces us into deep morale debaters like the LTT stuff, though obviously that did help my channel, and that's why many of you are here, so I will be forever grateful for the LTT stuff. And I will obviously keep covering it whenever something new comes up. Yeah, so again, not as spicy as some thought. I think not as spicy as maybe even Marquez thought. Overall, a decent breakdown of some individual like not even feature sets, how would you like, characteristics of like Android versus iOS, but not, again, it goes back to also what I said in the beginning. He does not do super detailed stuff. Like he could have turned it into like a 1 hour like video essay, but that's not kind of what the algorithm loves once you are like at 15 million I believe he is now close to like 17 million or something, right? Oh, I accidentally activated balloons. So he will keep on making like 15-minute videos because those are the videos that are watched the most. They're plus 10 minutes, they're less than 20 minutes, so they are in this Goldilocks zone where it doesn't quite feel like what I'm making, which is a 2-hour stream at this point. So my voice is giving up a little. I'm sorry, I already was like talking so much and I was like laughing so much because I was watching One Piece on Netflix. High recommendation, actually. Big shout out to One Piece in Netflix, breaking the live adaptation curse for anime. And beyond that, I'm just very grateful to anybody who could join, to anybody who will watch this as a VOD, to anybody who has given me tips on how to structure my content, to anybody who joined us here as a subscriber or as a follower on Twitter, even though I know it's technically not called follower anymore, nor is it called Twitter anymore, but you will still be my Twitter followers. I apologize for some hiccups in the stream. I think my internet is not as stable today, but I'm doing what I can out of it. So yeah, this was MKBHD telling us which is better, iOS versus Android, iPhone versus Android, and then not committing to either. I can definitely tell you that I prefer iPhone, and I definitely am not shy to give you reasons why. Maybe I will do like a video of like 13 reasons why I prefer iPhone or something like that. But that is all a video for another time. Thank you guys so much again. Please subscribe, please share, please comment afterwards what you would like to see next or what you just thought of this video. Please follow me on Twitter. Please consider supporting me on Patreon if you're interested. And I will end just with the words of Silicon Magic here. iPhone wins, of course. So this is Mark Tech tuning out.